There are some games you get excited for because of the gameplay, others because of the developers behind them, and sometimes it's simply because a trailer promises something massive. Then there are games like Mouse P.I. for Hire. Games that grab your attention purely because they look so fucking gorgeous that you just want to kiss them. These games are ones you almost feel obligated to try, and that was exactly the case for me with this one. Mouse was first announced back in 2023 by Polish indie studio Fumi Games, with publishing handled by Australian publisher Playside Studios. From the beginning, the pitch was simple but incredibly effective. Take the hand-drawn rubber hose animation style inspired by the 1930s cartoons and combine it with Doom. It was one of those concepts that instantly made people stop and pay attention, because everyone loves Cuphead. Nah, to be fair though, there aren't many games that do this rubber hose style and do it well. Even the developers themselves talked about wanting the game to be more than just a cool art project, aiming for something with proper gameplay depth and an actual noir detective story underneath the presentation. What first pulled me towards Mouse was exactly that style. I've always loved that old school rubber hose animation look, with the exaggerated movement and that classic 1930s visual identity where everything feels like it's alive. It's such a specific style, and when it's done well, it just makes you want to stick the game between two slices of bread and fuck. As more of the story started getting revealed, I became even more interested, because on top of that visual identity, it was also leaning heavily into the noir detective storytelling. That combination of cartoon absurdity and grim detective fiction felt like such a strange pairing that it either had the potential to be incredible, or it would, completely fall apart. At the same time though, I'm not personally a massive boomer shooter player. I enjoy them, and I love the modern Doom games, and I had a great time with Warhammer 40k Bolt Gun, but Doom is about as far as I usually venture into the genre. Because of that, my expectations going into Mouse were actually pretty tame, pretty much non-existent. I kept tabs on development and saw updates from the studio, but I never had that "I can't wait to play this" level of anticipation. It was more a case of seeing it release and thinking, oh yeah, that game looked pretty good, I should give that a shot. The game was originally targeting 2025 before being pushed back, and even in early 2026, it was delayed one final time from March to April. This happened so the developers could spend a little longer polishing it. They specifically said that they wanted to make sure they were taking the extra time and care needed to make it an experience to remember, which is always the right call, especially in this case. Because when a game leans this heavily on style and presentation, the last thing you want is for the actual experience to feel rushed. And after those few delays, it finally launched on April 16th, 2026 for PC, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and Nintendo Switch 2. And Troy Baker voices the protagonist, Jack Pepper, the grizzled private investigator. Because of course he does. Who else were you expecting? I'm not complaining though. I would lather his voice all over me if I could physically harness it. I wasn't really expecting some masterpiece. I was hoping for something entertaining with a strong art style and solid gameplay, and that's exactly what the game delivers. What surprised me the most though is that it delivers a lot more than just that. It ended up being far more charming, and that's what made it stick with me. From the moment I started playing it, it clicked almost immediately. I'll admit I'm probably a little biased here because I play an unhealthy amount of video games, and I've spent enough time with shooters that I pretty much understood what Mouse was asking of me before I even started. Even outside of my bias though, the opening does a really good job of teaching you how this world works. One thing I loved immediately was how clearly the game communicates what matters in the environment. All the background spaces and objects are 3D rendered, whilst almost everything interactive, objects, enemies, and important details are presented in 2D. Stylized boomer shooters all do this in some form, mainly just making enemies 2D and the environment 3D, but here it feels even more striking because the contrast between those two visual styles is so dramatic. It also helps the whole world feel like this strange hybrid between a playable cartoon and a grimy noir detective story. The tone gets established almost instantly too, and there's this constant balance between cartoon absurdity and genuine noir grit. You have wacky animated nonsense happening right next to murder investigations, corruption, crime, and shady backroom deals. And somehow, it completely works. That balance could have easily been a disaster if the writing didn't understand itself, but it absolutely does, and that confidence carries over into the gameplay as well. Mechanically, Mouse feels exactly how a boomer shooter should feel. Your character is fast, responsive, and smooth in everything they do. Weapon switching is quick, movement is, normal, and combat encounters throw enough enemies at you to keep things engaging without ever becoming overwhelming for the sake of it. It just works, which is one of the best compliments I can give it in the current gaming landscape. I also think the difficulty balance is really solid. It never felt unfair, but it also never felt mindless. Most of the time, when I died or got absolutely shredded, I knew exactly why. It was because I just overcommitted, or I missed a shot, or I just positioned myself badly. But because sections reset cleanly, you immediately know how to adjust, and that kind of design is important because it makes failure feel like learning instead of just general frustration. The progression is paced really well too, especially with weapons. Just as you get comfortable with one gun, the game introduces another, which keeps combat fresh without overwhelming you too quickly. For me though, my go-to weapon for most of the game ended up being the shotgun. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it's mostly personal preference because I always gravitate towards shotguns in games like this. There's just something so satisfying about them, you can't deny that. The real combo though came when I paired that with the Goop launcher. I genuinely cannot remember the actual weapon name, but if you've played it, you know the one. It fires toxic goop that damages enemies over time, and the alternate fire launches this timed explosive goop grenade. That thing was incredible, because most enemies only needed one clean shot. You hit them once in the face, they get stun locked, and then they just sort of melt over the next few seconds. It is ridiculously effective, and that shotgun and goop combo basically became my entire personality for most of the game. Unless I ran out of ammo, which did happen a lot. Beyond weapons, certain levels really stood out because of how much personality they had. There's one early game level where you break into a secret laboratory to gather evidence for one of your investigations, and that level stuck with me immediately. It's full of mechanical experiments, strange machinery, weird cartoon science nonsense, and for absolutely no reason whatsoever, there's just this bizarre octopus trapped inside a giant glass tank. It's just the kind of thing that makes you stop and think, why is this here? And the answer is just, because it's cool. Which, yeah, okay, I'll accept that. That level in particular just oozes cartoon charm, and it's one of those moments where the game fully understands that style matters just as much as function. I'm not saying that was just the only level that stood out, every single level does, but it was just that one in particular that stuck with me. And that same confidence carries into the story and the writing, which I actually really enjoyed. But pushing my enjoyment to the side for a moment, I've seen some criticism of it that completely misses the point of the game. For example, IGN's review complaining about the amount of cheese puns, which is ridiculous because they're mice. We're in a world of mice, of course there's going to be cheese puns. I've also seen people argue that this isn't a real noir because it's too silly. But again, it's a cartoon, bruv. It doesn't need to be serious. These criticisms show that IGN in particular were expecting the wrong thing entirely. And I reckon that probably bleeds out to a lot of people as well. No, it isn't trying to be some ultra-serious detective drama that leaves you staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m, question all your life choices. It's a cartoon noir shooter about mice. With that in mind though, that doesn't mean it lacks serious themes. The game deals with murder, kidnapping, trafficking, corruption, and just general crime. It just filters those darker ideas through this exaggerated cartoon lens. And I personally think that that contrast makes it better. Because when the game wants to be funny, it works. And when it wants to be serious, it works there as well. It never feels like a parody, just like a world that fully understands its own tone, which a lot of media fails to do. The detective fantasy also extends beyond just the shooting, which I appreciated a lot. You have a central hub area where you can interact with people you've helped, revisit characters, and hear how the events are affecting the world around you, which then obviously helps the city feel alive. You also have your own investigation office where you pin evidence to the walls and build connections between clues. To be fair, you're not exactly solving the mystery yourself, you just put the evidence on the wall and your character confirms the connection for you, but honestly, I didn't mind that. I mean, I was still going around collecting the evidence and was still building the board, so it still feels like you're part of the investigation. Sometimes, immersion matters more than complexity, and Mouse understands that. Then there's the presentation, which is probably the game's greatest strength. What impressed me the most is that the style never became exhausting. A lot of games built around one huge visual gimmick can start to wear thin after a few hours. You know what I mean, the novelty starts to fade and you stop noticing it. Or that's what I think at least. But that never happened with Mouse. The whole aesthetic is amazingly done, and you never sort of filter it out for the gameplay. The visuals are perfectly cartoony, the rubber hose animation style looks fantastic, and the movement and exaggerations feel authentic without feeling like a parody of the era. The audio also matches this perfectly. All of the music, all of the dialogue, and all of the actual voice performances themselves fit. Everyone puts on this slight little twinge in their accent to just fit the genre and the time period.
So? Did you get me a really glamorous opera pick?
Yeah. Just as the whole place went up in flames.
What?
Alongside this point, the game offers multiple options for the audio. You personally get to choose how high the distortion is, meaning you can make the audio sound perfectly crisp like everything current, or you can turn it up to sound like audio from back in time, with the crackling and everything. It's so cool. I always appreciate stylized games that allow you to change aspects like this. Jumping back to Bolt Gun, in that, you could turn down or turn up the amount of pixelation on everything. It's just fucking awesome. Having control over just those options in particular, especially in stylized games, is so cool. Everything feels like it belongs in the same world, and nothing feels like it's trying too hard. It all just falls perfectly into place, and that's harder to pull off than most people think. Presentation like this can very easily become gimmicky, but like I said, Mouse is so confident in what it wants to pull off, and the devs knew they could nail it. Even commercially, it seems like the confidence paid off. Very quickly after launching, the game built strong momentum, with overwhelmingly positive Steam reviews and reports suggesting roughly 360,000 copies were sold in its first few days. For a visually strange indie boomer shooter about noir detective mice, that's a pretty strong result. But honestly, I'm not surprised, because in a world where game trailers can be extremely misleading and gamers are lied to all the time about the quality of the final product, the fact that such a unique game can come out exactly as promised, with little to no bugs, is a miracle, and it should be praised as much as possible. If I had to talk about weaknesses, honestly, I don't really have any. I know that sounds like I'm dodging criticism, but genuinely, I struggle to find things that I disliked. Maybe I'm just easy to please, or maybe I simply don't know enough about boomer shooters as a genre to critique the deeper design decisions hardcore fans would notice. But in my own experience playing the game, I liked Mouse a lot. I had fun the entire time. The pacing worked, the progression worked, the writing worked, and the aesthetic also worked. Sometimes a review doesn't need some forced, here are 6 reasons that this is secretly flawed. Sometimes a game just lands for you, and this one did. That said, I also wouldn't call it my game of the year, not for any negative reasons, but it just unfortunately came out in a tough year in regards to competition. If anything, it's one of my favourites this year purely because of how strong its aesthetic is. And I would not be surprised in the slightest if it wins Best Art Direction. Part of me almost wonders if I would have preferred it in another genre, but that's kind of a useless thought because what other genre would it even be? Its identity is so tied to what it is that changing it would probably break the whole thing. So maybe I should just shut up. The better way to put it is this. If you're interested in Mouse purely because of the art style, that's a great reason to pay attention to it, because that style deserves more attention. But don't force yourself to play it if you genuinely dislike boomer shooters, because the art style alone won't carry the experience if you fundamentally hate the kind of game it is at its core. But if you do enjoy that kind of gameplay, or even if you're just open to it, Mouse absolutely earns the chance for you to try it out. I personally came mostly just for the art style, but I stayed because the game itself was actually worth staying for. In the simplest form, it's just so fun. But that's all about I wanted to say. So let me know what you think of the game. Tell me if you've played it or not, or if you're on the fence, let me know why. Let's just discuss it in the comments, man. Come on. Anyway, that's enough rambling from me. If you couldn't tell, I'm trying to mix in shorter videos like these into my non-existent upload schedule so I can still get videos out in a timely manner. So with that in mind, I'm going to sign off because I need to get this video edited. Goodbye.